Welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest, and I live here in Austin, Texas. I've had the gift of recovery since December the 27th of 1972. Very grateful for that to a really large number of people, and grateful to my wife for staying with me all these years. So the purpose of these podcasts is to go deeper into the history, the psychology, and the spirituality that underlie the 12-step recovery movement. Many of you are familiar with the Oxford Group because I talk about them quite a bit. The main source, it is the main source from which our 12-step programs really emerged. Here's a quote to kind of get us going. This is from Bill Wilson and expresses the link between the Oxford Group and the 12 Steps. He wrote, "Where did we learn about moral inventory, amends for harms done, turning our will and our lives over to the care of God? Where did we learn about prayer and meditation and all the rest? The spiritual substance of our remaining 10 steps, meaning 2 through 11, came straight from Dr. Bob's and my own early association with the Oxford groups." So our guests today are going to help us take a deeper dive into the groups, who founded it, what it aimed to accomplish, and then how it evolved over the years. And perhaps most importantly, what are some of the missing pieces that those of us in 12-step fellowships might learn, might take away from knowing more about our early history. And I know I learned the importance of guidance and two-way prayer and the power of the four absolutes. But I think we'll find that there are perhaps a few more surprises that still need to be uncovered. And so my guests to help us, a couple who are now living in Austin, married for, if I did the math right, guys, it's about 50 years, huh? Coming up?
That's next year.
Next year, coming up on 50. Wow. So they are uniquely positioned to be our guides. I may bring you back for one on how to sustain a marriage that long. I'm I'm getting up there too, so we can share notes. So our guests are Rob and Susan Corcoran. Both are longtime members, leaders in the movement and members as well, and have become good friends over the years. And I thought I would introduce Susan to you first. Susan has worked full-time with Initiatives of Change, and that is the present name of the Oxford Group. And she's worked with them for most of her adult life, and much of her work she did with Rob in Richmond, Virginia, and we will get to that in a bit. But originally, she helped in communicating the work of the Oxford Group through a talent in theater, which she probably inherited from her father, Alan Thornhill. Susan, welcome. And as we say in 12-Step, I appreciate you taking time to share with us your experience, strength, and hope. So good to have you here.
Thank you. I guess the thing I'm most grateful to my parents for is that they taught me how to have quiet times and the listening to God. It started when I was very young. There's a story that I joined them one morning when they were listening to God, and I was quiet, I think. And at the end, my father said to me, "What did Jesus say to you?" And I said, "He said good morning." And that relationship has been with me all my life. Immensely grateful for that. My parents were as different as two people could be. My father was from Oxford University, taught classics. My mother grew up in New York in the 20s, so you can imagine their different personalities. But they both had a transformative experience through the Oxford Group and through meeting Frank Bookman. Frank Bookman said to my father, "You need to read fewer books and more people." And that startled him so much, coming from a rather dusty academic position. And my mother's life changed when her father died of TB and she had to drop out of college. And she found something new from two people she met on the beach in Rehoboth Beach. But she ended up being Sam Shoemaker's secretary in New York at Calvary Church, where the Oxford group was based and where the whole AA movement was suddenly erupting and became very much a part of what they were all doing. But I think what really captured both my parents was the vision that Frank Bookman had, the vision not just for individuals, but a vision for the world. My father, unexpectedly, he had always had a love of theater. He left his position at Oxford and came to work with Frank Bookman in America. He said to several of his theater friends, somebody should write a play. There's so much good material here. Somebody should write a play, and nothing happened. And he woke up one morning and he started to write. And in 3 days, he wrote, which probably is his best play. It's a play called The Forgotten Factor. And as you might guess, the forgotten factor is God. But it's a very family-oriented play. It's two families, an industrialist and a trade union leader with various teenage children. And they're in conflict. They're either in a strike or approaching a strike. And it seems hopeless. And through the change, particularly in their son, they find a new relationship, these two men, and they're able to resolve the conflict. My father said the theme of the play is what happens at the breakfast table affects what happens at the conference table. He said, if I'd known anything about playwriting, I wouldn't have set every scene at the breakfast table. But good direction, it worked. So actually, he was involved in writing plays for the next almost, what do we say, 30 years of his life?
Yeah,
40 years of his life, ranging over lots of different subjects but it took him into the whole world of theater. And he said, there's not many ministers, because he was a minister, he said, who can say one thing from the stage on Saturday night and the same thing from the pulpit on Sunday morning.
People hear it differently from the stage and from the pulpit, and you're reaching a very different audience, most likely.
Yes, he was very aware of that. You wouldn't necessarily meet the same people in both places.
Right.
But he enjoyed the sort of contrast. His sermons are wonderful storytelling events. So I think he took a lot of theater into the pulpit. Certainly the pulpit was there in the plays.
I put a link to The Forgotten Factor in the show notes. I would encourage listeners to give it a good read. I think it's fascinating to see the principles of the Oxford group and the program expressed theatrically. You know, it just gives them a new twist. I'm glad that that's available. So thank you, Susan. And now, Rob, let me welcome you also to the podcast. It's good to have both of you guys here. And I've been looking forward to this for a while because I don't know that I've ever had somebody who was, engaged in it to the level that you folks have been. Special welcome to you. Let's see, Rob has spent his entire life working in fields related to the Oxford group, which was also known as moral rearmament. And he's been a trainer, a writer, and he's led healing workshops across North America, Europe, South Africa, India, Australia, and Brazil. He keeps a suitcase packed and ready to go at a moment's notice. He also served as head of the Oxford Group in the United States for many years and started a program that I want to discuss at some length a little bit later, and it is called Hope in the Cities. Rob is theoretically retired, as am I, and we probably both never worked harder in our lives. But he's still very active in many areas related to healing the great number of ills that are foundational to the problems of our modern world. But people don't seem to get to them. I mean, you can throw money at it, you can throw organizational things at it, but if you don't change people, this is the forgotten factor, I suspect, of the play, that change is necessary. So he's been a life changer, which is one of the names that the Oxford group adopted, or people started calling them that. So anyway, welcome, Rob. I'm talking too much, and I want to give you a shot. So good to have you here, my friend.
Thank you. Very different from Susan's. My dad grew up on the River Clyde in Scotland, the heart of the shipbuilding industry. It was a time of extreme poverty and class warfare. He left school at the age of 13 or 14 to try and earn some money for the family. Became trained in machine tools for the shipyard. One day he was surprised because a friend of his, he was actually a student at the Glasgow University. They were playing on the same badminton team, and this friend apologized to my dad for jealousy because my dad was the captain, and his friend felt he should have been captain. And my dad was curious as to why would he make this apology. And turned out that this student was part of the Oxford group, and there was a small group of students at the university. They began to meet with my dad and other folks down in the shipbuilding area. Totally new experience for these middle-class students who'd never really met any workers in their life. They talked about how we could change the world by changing people. And he thought that was a great idea, but he was again a little sort of skeptical. Then they introduced him to a businessman who, during the Great Depression, in order to avoid laying off any of his workforce, he'd moved into a smaller home, sold his house and moved into a smaller house. And when my dad heard that, he said, wow, these people are serious, right?
They're the real thing.
Look at what they talk about.
Yeah.
And so he began to hang out with them, and a very interesting teamwork developed at that time between students and workers, which was really unknown, bringing a new spirit to that part of the country. And then 1939, Frank Bookman was launching the Oxford Group in America, in the United States, and he invited my dad and several other students and workers to come and help him launch the program. So my dad and his friends went off thinking this was going to be, a visit of about a month or so. I think he got 7 weeks leave, and he ended up spending 7 years in the United States and was deeply involved in the work of industrial relations in the steel works, the aircraft factories, the mines, as part of the war effort. Some significant individuals in the steel industry and the aircraft industry had fairly radical transformation in their lives, which led to increased production and was greatly assisted in the war effort. So it was a very practical approach. He went on to work in many different parts of the world, Asia particularly. He married my mother, who, again, was a very different background. My mom was the daughter of a London businessman, and so you had this interesting combination again. So I grew up very much being aware of this whole approach to social change, which really intrigued me and was part of the reason why I came to be doing what I'm doing now.
Well, tell us about Frank Bookman. People don't know enough about him. He was always pretty much in the background. He wasn't, kind of the central figure. He had other people out there, center stage, shall we say. So let's dig into him a little bit, because I think if we understand his life, what it was that motivated him, you all talked about the vision. He had a vision, just like Bill Wilson had a vision. When he had his spiritual experience, the second part of his experience was a vision for the mass communication of this message to other people. And I think Bookman certainly had that. So let's start with who he was and how he got going.
An American, he was a Lutheran minister.
Yes.
In Pennsylvania. with a very Pennsylvania Dutch background. He had done quite a lot of missionary work in India and China. So I think that's where he got his world vision. And he ended up working with the YMCA. And while he was there, he got in conflict with the board of directors because over the question of how much food they would give the boys. And he felt very bitter about it, and he left the position. And he was traveling, and one day he walked into a small church, and he suddenly had the thought, they are 6 wrong men, but I am the 7th wrong man. He decided to write letters to each one, apologizing for his attitude. I don't know. I've never heard any story about whether anybody wrote back or anything else, but he was transformed. He became a free man, free of this bitterness that had controlled his life. And from then on, he went on to really decide to enlist young men and women in the work of changing the world. It took all sorts of shapes and sizes. The name, the Oxford Group, which people often wonder, well, how did they get the name of Oxford Group? He had spent quite a bit of time in Oxford, and he was a fresh American breeze in this very stuffy academic place. And it really attracted a lot of people. And he took a small group of students to South Africa on a trip. And the porter or whoever was in charge of the group wrote he said, what do I write on the car of who's in this car? And somebody said, just write the Oxford Group. So he wrote the Oxford Group, and that was then picked up by the press, and it became the name of the organization for the next, 20 years, until people said, this isn't really very relevant, because by that time, Bookman was working in multiple countries, other continents. But before the war, Bookman was very deeply concerned, as I suppose most people were, with the growing animosity that was in the world, the hatred, the intense build-up to the war. And I don't know whether he came up with the phrase, I think it was somebody else, who said, what we need is a moral and spiritual rearmament. And that is the phrase he took into the Second World War, and it lasted well beyond that. But moral rearmament as an alternative to the war of arms and people. That lasted until the turn of this last century. I think one factor was a certain confusion between moral rearmament and the moral majority in this country. And the other thing was, in a lot of different languages, and of course, the work had spread to every corner of the world. And a lot of people said, we can't translate moral rearmament. It doesn't translate into our language. We need something simpler. So a conference was called of people from all over the world, and they discussed together what would work. And initiatives of change became the answer, the solution. And there were a lot of programs that were sort of tucked into initiatives of change that were the initiatives. But that's how we've got to where we are. Whether it's the ideal name, I don't know, but it's really what you do with the name. And I think the key thing was building trust across the world's divides. And I often think if people were to say, who are initiatives of change? Who are these people? I would simply want to ask, they're building trust. Not an easy thing to do.
Not an easy thing at all. And yet it's what maybe undergirds the change process. It started in Bookman's life was, when I've studied it, I can see the evolution of the steps, the 12 steps in his own life. He underwent a conversion experience. He took responsibility for his part in that, as you mentioned, which is step 4, made amends to the 6 fellows on the board, So all of the steps things are there. he was interested in finding spiritual principles and practices that were effective in changing people. And then back to his vision, how do you change the world? One of the things we did leave out, the first name was a first century Christian fellowship. And I remember when I was diving into the history, that jumped out at me. I was struggling with Christianity myself at that time. You know, I was like, well, I don't know that I believe this, that, or the other thing. I mean, when it came to doctrines and dogmas, which was the way I was approaching it, it wasn't working for me. But a first century Christian fellowship, his idea, correct me if I'm wrong, was let's get beyond these and back to the original, which changed people. I mean, people came into the presence of Jesus and they changed, you know, and was quite amazing and quite powerful. So I thought it was a good name, but, you know, it did need to evolve. It did need to change, but it's kind of started with that. What role does God, the divine, have in the change process? I know we're going to get to this, but two-way prayer, bringing one's problems to God, and then the four absolutes. So let's just jump in and talk about those, especially the four absolutes and the prayer. How are those linked in your mind?
I think they're really closely connected. In your book, Bill, you quote Jean Brown, her formula of connect, correct, and direct, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's a very helpful way of looking at it, you know, that taking time to really sort of connect with our inner self, our true self, the voice of God, if we believe in that. Thinking about what correction do I need to make in my life? Maybe there's apologies to make. Maybe there's something to do differently. And then thirdly, direction. You know, what's the direction we're meant to go on today and looking ahead? Because I think we do need to think strategically if we're serious about bringing about the kind of change that we're talking about. Soon after we arrived in Richmond, a good friend said, now, who are the 5 blacks and 5 whites who, if they had a Damascus Road experience, could transform the city? That was a pretty challenging question, you know, to begin to think about, okay, who are the individuals that I feel called to reach out to and to work alongside? And interestingly, you know, we did identify several individuals.
Rob, was this coming to you in the form of guidance in terms of what is it that you are personally being called to do? And you're in Richmond, and that's where this story begins for Hope in the Cities.
Right. Yeah. We were right at the beginning of our work there, and this friend asked us that question, you know, which did, I think, provide a very useful frame for our morning quiet time to think about, right? The first individuals we were led to reach out to was our immediate neighbors, a black couple, civil rights couple. They actually knocked on our door and welcomed us to the neighborhood the day we were arriving. And we felt that we should really reach out in friendship to them, and we became very close friends of Audrey and Collie. They were looking for something different. They'd been involved in many civil rights struggles over the years, and I remember Collie, the husband, saying, you know, we worked so hard to change structures, but because we didn't change the hearts of people, we had to keep doing it all over again.
Right.
So they began to experiment with taking morning times of quiet or two-way prayer. They were committed Christians, active in their church, but the idea of actually taking time every morning.
They were not familiar with the quiet time practice. You taught that to them?
That was new, a new idea for them, yes.
New for them,
absolutely.
yes.
Yeah.
But they took to it instinctively. Eh?
They took to it.
Yeah.
And they had the thought that they should reach out to someone who they found difficult. He was a senior white
They're never
city
hard to find, are they?
city manager. I mean, Colley and he had clashed on public policy issues. But anyhow, they invited them. They invited Howe Todd and his wife to their home for a cookout. And surprisingly, these two couples became close friends over the months as they worked together. Howe Todd changed his attitude quite a lot. Oh, about a year after this encounter had taken place, I met by chance
in the
elevator, the leader of a black organization, and he said, "What has happened to Mr. Todd?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, he always used to be known as someone who never listened. When I went into a meeting with him, I always felt that the cards were stacked and the decisions were already made. Now he actually listens to what I have to say." So and everybody noticed this change in relationship between these two couples. And that created, you might say, a sort of ripple effect across the city. The demonstration of transformed lives is more effective than any amount of analysis or exhortation for change, right? When you see someone who is so obviously different from what they were, people sit up and take notice.
It starts small, doesn't it? It almost has to start small.
Yes. All of our early work in Richmond was actually based around either our home or the home of our neighbors, Colley and Audrey, and it often involved potluck dinners, people coming together, eating together at the same table, sharing their stories, right? And the thing sort of grew. The thing which also, I think, inspired people was the vision, because as you will well know, Richmond was a city with a very painful racial history, right? I mean, it was one of the largest centers for the domestic slave trade. It was the capital of the Southern Confederacy, time of the Civil War, and Virginia had sort of led the way in a process of massive resistance against school integration. So you might say, this is not the ideal place for a change to occur. But the sort of vision was if change should come about in Richmond, it could come about across the country. It was interesting how the name Hope in the Cities came about, because we said, well, we're not going to call it hope for the cities. We're going to call it Hope in the Cities, because that hope is already there. And what we need to do is to
mine it.
Yeah, to mine it, exactly, to discover who are the people. And so it really took off over the years, and a lot of very careful one-to-one work grew into public events. So by 1993, the city was able to host the first sort of public walk through its racial history, when people from all around the country and all around the world actually walked together to mark some of the most difficult places in Richmond's racial history. There's much more that I can say about that, but it led to an ongoing program for change. Susan talked about trust a minute ago, and it was interesting because one of my early experiences when I came to Richmond, remember, I'm the son of a person from the labor movement. I'm a social democrat, right? And so arriving in Richmond and finding all of these people who were incredibly conservative and, from my point of view, in need of a lot of improvement. And I met this guy, John Coleman, who was a Black American. He ran a community center in the East End of Richmond for impoverished kids. He was a recovering alcoholic, and he had become deeply involved in racial healing work. And he said to me at one point, he said, "You have to build a bridge of trust that is strong enough to bear the weight of the truth that you're trying to deliver." The bridge of trust must be strong enough to bear the weight of the truth that you're trying to deliver. And so that whole theme of how do we build the bridge of trust became, as Susan said, really a sort of theme for our work in Richmond, and indeed now in many different countries around the world. Yeah, but it all went back to, the individual people, often unexpected people, taking courageous steps of change in their own life and reaching out to others.
Newspaper.
The newspaper, yeah. The newspaper was a great example because the Richmond Times-Dispatch was the one newspaper in the city. Many people regarded it as public enemy number one because of its racist editorials. And we sent a delegation to go and meet with the senior editors and invited them to become part of a vision for a different Richmond. And they were so surprised that they sent a young reporter, the first black columnist that the paper had employed. They sent this young man to cover the conference that we were doing in 1993. And it got major coverage, then led to a conversation with the editors about the role of the newspaper and so forth. And over the years, the attitude of the newspaper changed dramatically. We co-hosted public events with them. They wrote editorials which said, we need to seriously consider the case for reparations and so forth. And it was quite a dramatic change. And this young reporter, 3 years ago, he won the Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of how the Confederate statues had been removed from Monument Avenue, because our famous Monument Avenue had Confederate statues to Confederate leaders all the way down, and they were removed largely with public support. Michael Paul Williams, this columnist, won a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage. So the paper came a long way in becoming an ally, really, for change.
In moving to the name Initiatives of Change, my understanding from the history is people would approach Bookman and say, Dr. Bookman, you need to have your people doing this. And they'd have a good idea, out it would come. And he said, well, if this idea is coming to you, it's probably up to you to do this. And so you start an initiative. So it's a good name in that sense, that there are any number of initiatives around the world that are happening because people feel guided to bring about the change that perhaps started with them in their own life, and now they want to bring this to the conflicts which are going on all over the place. I mean, it doesn't take long, starting in your own home, perhaps, to find a conflict, And that's where you begin.
And I think it's often as we make reparations, as we find the people that we need to build a bridge with and apologize, that often sparks something new and some development with this person or a group of people. But it's often been the starting place for individuals who want to make a difference. Reach out to the people that you've been in conflict with, and you have to discover, we often say you have to discover your team. Your team is already there, but you need to find them.
And some are not ready to forgive or to change. That discernment process of gathering a team is an effort in and of itself. People come to me, a lot of times, and they say, I want to start a two-way prayer meeting. And it becomes very mechanical. I discourage them from doing so. I say, go start a small team, because if you try to do a big one and there isn't that trust and there isn't that fellowship built, which takes time and effort, it's probably not going to last, or it'll be very superficial. So you worked very closely with a small team of people, and that did grow. It expanded. Other people were drawn in to the vision, and that is the way it happens. What's the role of the morning quiet time in that? Could you speak about that and speak to us a little bit more about the four absolutes and what role they play in this transformational change process? Maybe from your own experience.
For our family was the basis on which we made most of our decisions. I mean, Rob and I arrived in Richmond, Virginia. Where do we live? Which neighborhood should we be in? These questions that people face every day of the year. But how do you make those decisions?
Mm-hmm.
And we try to really make them on the basis of a quiet time and listening, some discovery about the city and what was going on and so on. But we chose a neighborhood. We chose this one neighborhood in Richmond, which was already integrated. And that made a huge difference to the future of our work.
Mm.
And I would say the other question that came up, which comes up for everybody, is where should our children go to school? And we were quite fortunate. The school in our neighborhood was considered a good school. It was 50% white, 50% black. And we decided we would put our kids in this school. And for me, I said, it's important that these kids learn that they are not the majority. You know, there are people in this world who are very different from them. They had a wonderful school experience, and it brought a lot of richness to our home. But I think all the decisions we made related to family, related to living, were made in the quiet time. And it didn't always come with one sitting down and listening.
Right.
It often had to grow over time. And you suddenly became very sure that this is, but I think the knowledge that you made the decision with this sureness then also encouraged you when the road was rocky and things were difficult. We had one experience where with our younger son, suddenly something happened in the school and all the white kids started to leave and go to another school. We said, is that what we're going to do too? And so again, we took time and quiet to listen. And we said, well, there's nothing wrong with the learning that Andrew's doing at school. He's got lots of friends. He's in a good place. So we'll stick it out in this school. But the assurance that came from knowing that this was not just a top of the head idea, but it was something that we really considered, the two of us, in quiet, listening, that two-way prayer. So those are two examples I can think of. But.
And I would say that all of our sons, and I interviewed each of them when I was writing the book, and I was asked them about their experience at school. And, they all had different challenges, but each of them said, we would not be the people we are now if we had not had those experiences. And so they took that into the world, and they felt made them much more ready to face all the challenges that everybody does face in the world.
Right. How about the four absolutes? What role have they played in your life?
They're very much still there. I think
Let's hope so.
I suppose they're a little less. People are less interested in something. Well, these are the rules. I think when people think these are the rules, then you get a certain resistance. Jean Brown, again, I think it is, who's talked about how they're liberating elements.
Right.
That if you're trying to live by these four standards, they actually liberate you. It's not imprisoning you in a confine of standards. But probably we are less conscious of sort of prescribing them, but finding ways to bring them into the experience.
I think they're important because we're living in a world where the whole question of any kind of moral standard is often questioned. If you get to a position where people say, yes, I feel called to do something, or I feel God is leading me to do something, and they're not, and you don't have that sort of grounding of the standards, that's a road to dictatorship, actually. A lot of the great tyrants in the world believed that they were somehow ordained by God to do what they were doing. But if you actually put it against the standard of honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love, okay, how does that stand up, right? They're important. Not as rules, but I think they are an important foundation.
Well, the trust-building groups.
Yeah, all of the groups that we're working with, that's the sort of starting point in a way, is really sort of having people look at their own lives, their own relationships, what might need to change. Very much foundation.
Right. And from the very beginning until now, though the name has changed, those two principles, practices, the absolutes and the morning quiet time, that's been central all throughout, correct?
It's absolutely essential, yeah.
Yes, and very simple. See, that was one of the thing blew my mind when I started studying the history of AA, was that in the beginning, prayer and meditation were viewed as more important, central, foundational than were going to meetings. Meetings were helpful. And for 20 years, it had been drilled into me, meetings, rather than meditate, pray, all of that sort of stuff. And I think you find a balance. It's not one against the other. Where is the real change going to come about? And it seems to be in that morning quiet time, taking our problems to the higher power, to the voice. And the voice goes by many names, but people can find it. People can access it. And it's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple process, at least I've found it so. A few little ground rules and off you go. And like you say, if your first guidance is move to Chicago, you might want to temper it down a little bit and see if that lasts over a few months. If it's consistently there, then
I think the other thing is that I think has been an important aspect is checking with a trusted friend, right?
Yes.
So obviously with me and Susan, we're able to sort of check each other, because I probably often get thoughts which I may think are inspired that Susan may say, that's crazy, right? And I think it's really important that we have somebody with whom we can sort of share whatever we think is coming from God or from our inner voice or whatever, and see whether it makes sense to them. That's not always the deciding point, but I do think it's really helpful to have that.
It's helpful. Yeah. Did you know T. Willard Hunter? I thought it was interesting. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's not that interesting, but he had a marvelous story in his book about Frank Bookman. The book was about Bookman, but he had the story in there about Reinhold Niebuhr, who was teaching at Union Theological Seminary in New York City, and ironically was also the author, purported author at least, of the AA's Serenity Prayer. So Hunter wrote that Niebuhr had contempt for Frank Bookman, and that he thought his approach for achieving world peace was naive and dangerous. Those were his words. And here's a quote with Niebuhr saying this, and I wanted to kind of tease this out a little bit. He says, if the movement, meaning the Oxford Group or MRA, would content itself with preaching repentance to drunkards and adulterers, one might be willing to respect it as a religious revival method which knows how to confront the sinner with God. But when it runs to Geneva, the seat of the League of Nations, or to any seat of power, always with the idea that it is on the verge of saving the world by bringing the people who control the world under God control, it is difficult to restrain the contempt which one feels for this dangerous childishness. Love it. Hunter rose to the occasion in the book and responds this way. Apparently, Niebuhr believed Christianity is okay for personal salvation for marginalized people. It must, however, at all costs, be kept out of the international power centers where the big decisions are made that affect us all. I enjoyed that so much when I read it. I wish I had known Hunter, because it encapsulates what you guys have been about for your whole life. I'm sure there were times, am I really going to be able to change the world in doing this piece of action that I seem guided to do? And yet, in another sense, it's probably the only way that the world is going to change, is if people begin with their own lives, and then it's like the ripples in the stream. We can throw money at problems and we can create all sorts of organizations, but if they're not driven by changed people, I wonder if it's going to be successful. You guys are changed people, and you helped change a big part of Richmond. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. I don't know that it's going to come another way.
I pray constantly for even people in our government who might have a Damascus Road experience. Fall off the horse and see a light, see something different.
Right.
And it could happen. Anyone could be that person, because St. Paul certainly was not the person they had in mind for changing the world.
No.
I came across a quote from Cardinal Franz Koenig, who served as Archbishop of Vienna from 1956 to 1985. So he says, Frank Bookman's great idea was to show that the teaching of Jesus Christ is not just a private affair, but the great force to change the whole structure of the social order in economics, of political ideas, if we combine the changing of structures with the change of heart. In that sense, he opened a completely new approach to religion, to the teachings of Jesus Christ, and to the life of modern man. That's a pretty powerful statement from a cardinal who was very familiar with our work. And Reinhold Niebuhr, he talks about Geneva and bringing change in Geneva. But as you know, one of our main international conference centers is not far from Geneva in Switzerland, a place called Co, right? And
I've been there.
Yeah, I know you've been there, Bill, I'm sure, on several occasions. And that place really was founded right after World War II as a way to bring together the nations of Europe after the war. And so you had the first civilian groups of Germany to be able to leave Germany after the war, came to conferences in Switzerland, and they'd encountered French people and others whom they'd been at war with. And there was some remarkable reconciliations took place, which I'm not going to go into now, but it actually played a major role in the change of attitudes that made it possible for what we now have in Europe in terms of the European Union and so forth. Would not have been possible if that kind of change, which involved leadership people from all the different levels coming together at a place like that where a new spirit could be formed.
And they may, oftentimes, Bookman liked to bring people together who were in conflict with one another.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
And have them meet together in an atmosphere where, let me share what it has been like for me. Okay, and let me listen now to you tell me what it has been like for you. And we come to understand one another. And to see our role in the conflict, just like Bookman did with those 6 fellows. I mean, it's the same thing, just on a larger scale.
I was going to say hospitality was a big piece of it. They often met over a meal, a delicious meal. It made all the difference.
Yes, and they cooked it themselves. When I was there, we were all assigned jobs to do, and like when the prime minister of this, that, or the other country, was in attendance, he or she was on kitchen duty, Humbling.
That's right.
Humbling. I want to talk about this article because this paper that you wrote, Rob. It takes some of these themes, goes into them more deeply. I am going to put a link to it as well in the show notes. Talk maybe particularly about the Canadians and the Australians and what their experience was in taking ownership for their own behavior, and that being the seed of change within the country.
Well, it's a big topic, and of course, it's an ongoing process. But certainly, the Canadians have done important work. The government has actually made an official apology. The church also, because as you know, like in this country, the church ran a lot of schools for First Nations people. It was a terrible experience, really. I mean, they were not allowed to speak their own language. They couldn't wear their traditional clothes. There was a lot of violence. And now, for the first time, the church has taken some responsibility for that. I know the Pope was there a couple of years ago, I think, looking at that whole question, and they created a commission which went all the way around the country, involving hundreds of people, where people were able to tell their stories. Beginning to look at the whole question of what does reparations look like in a country like Canada. Australia also, of course, a very difficult history with the Aboriginal people, First Nation people there. Again, a lot of careful work has been going on, creating opportunities for people to come together, to actually hear the stories, to visit some of the sites which were involved in that. There was a campaign to create you might say, a permanent voice for the Aboriginal people in Parliament, and that was defeated in a referendum. So it just shows the pushback that we have in all of our countries to this kind of work. And of course, we're seeing it here also. I think the key points my colleague Mike Winger and I make in this paper is that, true and enduring change requires both acknowledgement and compensation for past harms and deep healing for the wounds created. So in a way, we have to do both repair and healing at the same time. And we need to heal together as a nation.
Yes.
Which is going to involve a clear and accurate telling of history, a sense of everybody having an ownership in that story, and that all sectors need to be involved. Can't just be one group of people. It has to be a wide cross-section. And so, that's what they're trying to do in Canada. That's what they're trying to do in Australia. And now in a lot of other countries around the world where there's a tremendous need to both do the healing work and the repair, and to build the kind of trust that makes it possible to do any of that.
The Oxford group hit its prime, let us say, between the period of World War I and World War II, numerically. Bookman was convinced that if there was not a new form of Christianity, there was going to be a Second World War. If and that was his driving the driving force in his life, that we've got to act and we've got to change, and that change begins with me, and it begins with you and your family and your community, and the ripple in the pond, it goes out from there. So important. God knows the world is in as bad a shape, or maybe even worse today. So in AA and 12-step world, we have no opinion on outside issues, and that goes back to our history. Bookman may have been out to change the world, and Wilson was only out to change drunks, and he wanted to limit it, and the two diverged in part, over that issue. But, after you've been sober for a while, perhaps there's more to it. This is what my experience was. I do have some opinions on outside issues, and I might even be called to do something about them. Not within AA. I think they were wise to set it up that way, but individuals, we need to become the change that God wants to see in this world. If we don't do it, nobody's going to do it. None of us is getting any younger these days. We've devoted our lives, you to the group, as God has guided you, me through AA, as God has guided me, coming up on 53 years sober soon, and very grateful for it. But my life changed when I went and started studying the history and started studying Frank Bookman and started practicing the morning quiet time and asking for guidance, practicing the four absolutes in my life. I mean, my wife would say there's more to be transformed, for sure. There's no doubt about that. But I'm going in the right direction. And I just reflecting back, it was a rich life, and it was talk to us about that. How you reflect on it.
There have been times when I've felt, we're out of step with the rest of the world.
Yes.
But sometimes you have to be swimming, or I've got my mixed metaphors here. You have to be swimming in the other direction. You have to risk not being appreciated or welcomed. And that's been our experience at different times. But I think it's the people around us that we care for and that we reach out to that make a difference. I think they become our team.
Yes.
If we work with them.
And are patient for their arrival sometimes.
Yes. It's interesting now arriving in a new city. And in a way, we have to start all over again.
Yeah.
We started with COVID for 3 years, when it was very hard to go out and meet people, but we were grateful to have a church community already.
Mm-hmm.
And that has worked well for us. But we're sort of ready to explore a new horizon.
I'm not sure I have much more to add. I mean, I really believe that God can use everyone in different ways that we can never really imagine. So I think our job is to encourage the best qualities in everybody that we meet, And it's surprising, I mean, we're now living in an apartment complex that is sort of designed for the, 55 plus? 55 plus. Or
Active
55 plus, right? So we got a couple of hundred folks with apartments here. As a great sense of community. But also what's interesting is when you start discovering people's background, their lives are really remarkable. You would never know it, unless you actually took time to discover.
to listen.
And to listen. Yeah.
And to listen to them, right. That's right.
To listen to them. Yeah, to listen to them. So we've done that with a few people, and it's really fascinating. And you find there's a lot there, and a lot of interesting connections. So, as Susan says, we're sort of at a point of sort of discovery. What are we going to be led to? And we'll see. I'm sure it'll be an adventure, whatever it is.
I know it will be. Well, listen, guys, I really want to thank you for coming here and sharing some of this history with us. It's an important part of our lineage. And the more we understand it, some of the practices that got left behind are quite life-changing. Austin, look out. The Corcorans are here, and they ain't done. And God has work for them. I know you're going to do it. So thank you so much for being with us. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. I hope this was helpful to you. And again, I will put links. Rob has a blog and things that he's got a website. You can go there, learn a little bit more, and sign up. So thank you all for listening. God bless. Keep coming back.